cognitive dissonance and persuasion. People hate their actions to be inconsistent with their beliefs. The idea behind dissonance is that if people observe their own behaviors and those behaviors are inconsistent with their beliefs, that oftentimes they will change their attitudes to match their behaviors. Dissonance has numerous consequences for attitude change. Let's take a look at a few different areas. Insufficient justification. One of the most famous studies in all of social psychology demonstrates the power of people doing things that they don't necessarily believe. Let's look at it briefly. Festinger and Carl Smith, 1959. Participants in this study were asked to do 2 separate tasks, each of which took 30 minutes. In the first, they had to turn a board full of 48 pegs a quarter turn to the left, and then back to the right, and then to the left, and back to the right, and so on and so forth for 30 minutes. Then the experimenter came back and gave them another task, this time removing 12 spools of thread from another board and putting them back, and removing them and putting them back, and so on and so forth for 30 minutes. These tasks were designed to be boring. I think it's safe to assume that they succeeded. So everyone did very boring tasks. All participants were then told by the experimenter that, in fact, they were in the control condition, and in reality, the persons coming in after them were in the experimental condition. Then came the crucial moment. Participants were asked to tell the next participant, actually a Confederate, who was waiting in the hall, that you thought this experiment was fun and exciting. Then came the manipulation. Some participants were offered $1 to do this, while others were offered $20, a pretty healthy sum in those days. All participants agreed regardless. After telling the Confederate that the experiment was really fun and exciting, their real attitudes about the tasks they did in the experiment were measured via a questionnaire. Well, there was also a control group that was not asked to tell the Confederate that the study was boring, so we have 3 conditions. We have the lie condition for $1, lie for $20, and the no lie condition. After the experiment, participants were tracked down by someone else and asked a bunch of questions about the experiment under the guise that it was a general follow-up of the department, that they were doing some type of checkup on their experimenters. One of the questions on this form was about how much they enjoyed the experiment. So the dependent variable is how much did they actually enjoy the experiment. Now, in which condition or conditions do you think participants reported that they enjoyed the experimental tasks the most in real life? So here are the results from the 3 conditions. In the condition that was paid $20, they reported to enjoy the task the least. In the $1 condition, they reported to like the task the most. In fact, it almost doubled. Participants in this condition seem to indicate that they actually did like the task. What do you think is going on here? What accounts for this pattern of results? Well, the explanation offered by Festinger and Carl Smith is called insufficient justification, when people perform an attitude-discrepant behavior for a small reward. Basically, they said that the people in the $20 lie group did not really experience dissonance. This was because even though they were engaging in an attitude-discrepant behavior, they were saying they liked the task. But they knew they hated it, and they knew exactly why they were doing it. They were doing it because they got paid $20. But the $1 condition did not provide this out of the dissonance that easily. So participants who were doing something that was attitude-discrepant, but were only getting paid $1, couldn't justify their behavior. So the only way out of the dissonance was to change their belief. Yeah, I must have really liked that task better than I thought after all. I should note that this effect and other effects that emerge from the dissonance literature has been a topic of much dispute over the years. At least 4 different explanations have been offered for it, often as competing explanations. Effort justification effect. When we work hard or suffer to obtain something, we're more likely to have a positive attitude toward it. For example, one study found that persons liked a discussion group more if they had to do something really embarrassing, as opposed to only mildly embarrassing, to get into it. Decisional dissonance, tension between the alternative persons have chosen and the attractive features of the alternatives they have given up. Every time you make a decision, say to purchase something, you're essentially making a decision to not purchase other things. When those other things have attractive features, this can create dissonance. Why didn't you purchase those other things if they're so great? We don't like that. And one of the ways that we resolve this problem is by having a positive attitude toward the things we chose. Social commitment and persuasion. The key for salespeople to tap into this commitment consistency norm is to obtain some type of commitment from you. To the degree that they do that, they can use that commitment or consistency in order to manipulate you. Consider this. A common practice of salespeople is to ask, "How are you doing?" This tends to increase subsequent sales and donations. Have you ever noticed that when people call you on the phone to ask for money, what they frequently ask is, "How are you doing?" To which most of you will reply, "I'm doing fine, thanks." Well, why do you think they do that? Well, are they just really nice people? Possibly, but odds are they know full well that doing this increases the likelihood that you're going to give money to them. Why? If we look at this through a cognitive dissonance lens, you can see that the consistency commitment norms are being put in place. You just said publicly that you're doing great. Given that you're doing great, it's hard for you to say later that you're going to be stingy. That wouldn't be consistent at all. Foot in the door technique. Increasing compliance with a large request by asking people to go along with a smaller request. Consider this famous study by Friedman and Fraser. They asked folks if they would be willing to put this huge, ugly public service billboard that says "Drive carefully" in their yards. I mean, this thing was ugly and huge. Here's what they did. Some of the subset of people they went to 2 weeks prior to making this huge request and asked for a tiny request to display a 3-inch wide sign that said, "Be a safe driver." Almost everyone agreed to this request. Most people who had not previously agreed to the small request said no. Only 17% said that they would put the big billboard up. But those folks who had agreed to the tiny request, 76% said they would put up the giant ugly billboard. Now that's a huge percentage difference for such a ridiculous request. What's going on here? It's simple. It's the norm of consistency or commitment. People had previously agreed to a kind of commitment to safe driving. They had said they were the kind of person who supported safe driving. Now what? Now they're asked to do something else relevant to safe driving. Of course I'm going to do that. That's the kind of person I am. Lowball technique. Influencer secures agreement with a request, but then increasing the cost of honoring the agreement. Another even more deceptive approach that is sometimes used by salespeople is to get you to commit to a particular price, full well knowing that the price is too good. Then at the last minute, they'll say, "Oops, my boss wouldn't go for that," or the salespeople let the bank find the error, or worse, they offer an inflated price on a trade-in only to realize at the last minute that it was too high and reduce it by $400. You might think this is the kind of thing that doesn't work because it's too obvious, but boy, it does work. Cialdini even says that once he witnessed a customer apologizing profusely to a salesperson who had pulled that last stunt on her because she felt like she had tried to take advantage of him. After all, she knew she was getting a good deal on the original price. But this is why it works. It works because of our need to be consistent. Once we've committed to something, it's hard for us to uncommit.